Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon,
Am I
sir.
audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Voice is clear?
Yes, sir.
PPT is visible now?
Yes, sir.
So, good afternoon, everyone. We will start uh, with whatever we are studied in last lecture. So, we have started virtualization. Okay, we have discussed pros and cons of this particular traditional server concepts. So, is it clear what are the pros and cons of this traditional server concept to everyone? Okay, so these PPTs give the idea that is what are the pros and cons of traditional server concept. And we have discussed what is virtualization. We have discussed the definition of virtualization. Okay, so virtualization is nothing but the abstraction of computer resources. Okay, so this is a technology which will convert your hardware resources into a software resources, and that particular resources are offered to the end user for deploying their applications. Okay, so we have discussed this. That is what virtualization does. It will hide the physical characteristics of computing resources from the user. Okay, and is a definition which we have discussed what is virtualization. So virtualization is nothing but a framework or methodology which is available in the form of software application or software tool. Okay, and what it does, it divides the resources of a computer into a multiple execution environment. Okay, so whenever you want to adopt a virtualization for anything, that is for the networking, storages, or creating the virtual machines, what we required a virtualization tool. So virtualization tool is nothing but a methodology by which we can partitions our hardware resources into a multiple execution environment, and along with that, instead of allocating a physical resources directly to the end user or the application, we can convert it into the soft resources. Okay, so virtualization is a framework or methodology of dividing the resources of computer into a multiple execution environment by applying one or more concept or technologies such as hardware and software partitioning. Okay, the hardware and software partitioning means dividing your resources into a multiple execution environment. Time sharing, because many times what we do, as we already discussed, that we have one physical server and we can create a multiple virtual instances over that particular physical server. Maybe you have a one processor, you have a one hard disk drive, okay, and a single RAM, and over we are running multiple virtual machines. So definitely what you have to do, you have to go for the time sharing concept of operating system. So the time of your processor is shared among the multiple virtual machines which is running on the top of that particular hardware. So that concept we have to apply, and that is critical as compared with the traditional one. Partial or complete machine simulation. Partial or complete machine simulation. So simulation is nothing but creating a software-based environment for any kind of hardware resources. Okay, so simulation is popular nowadays for designing your project, because many times we are not able to fabricate a real-time scenario using hardware devices. So many times we prefer a simulated environment for running your algorithms or application. Just like you are having a NS2 simulator, then you use a Android Studio, that is again a simulator for running your mobile application onto the hardware devices, designing and running application. You are having a different kinds of simulators for sensors network and ad hoc network. So simulator will offer you a runtime environment, convert your hardware resources into a software resources, and it will provide the integrated environment to run or test your application. Then emulation is again a concept by which we can emulate your hardware devices. So simulation make use of a emulation concept. Emulation is nothing but converting your hardware resources into software-based instances are called as emulation. So many times we can use the emulator. Electronics engineer always use the emulator to design the circuitry. Different kinds of softwares are available, just like a Xilinx, Altera. These are the vendors who will provide the simulated or emulated environment. Means if you want to design any new processor, which you want to launch in the market. But before physically designing that particular resources, what you have to do, you have to test it, you have to design it, and you have to test it for all the parameters. So designing the physical processor is not a viable solution. So what are the another alternative? We can make use of emulator software. So your Xilinx software, if you explore that, Xilinx software will offer you to create a soft core processor using a programming code. Okay, they use a Verilog or VADL programming languages, and using that you can create your circuitry, complete a PCB or a processor or a microcontroller using a what you say, software coding, and you can test it out for all the parameters, that is power consumptions, performance, and everything. And then after, if that is completely okay, that if that circuit is okay for all the parameters, then you can convert it into a hardware devices. Then you can manufacture that particular PCB or that particular processor or the microcontroller in the physical manner. So every electronics engineer make use of that particular emulator, that is emulation software, emulators for testing their PCB before physically designing, because physical designing of any processor or any device is very costly. So if you want to check it for the multiple times with the different parameters, just like we will do the software testing, they do PCB testing or the device testing for the multiple parameters, varying voltages, varying currents, data signals, and how that will be performed. So for that, they will use emulation. That is, emulation is a technique which will convert or provide us software instances of your hardware resources. So emulation is a base for your simulation, and simulation is a base for your virtualization concept. Okay. So first of all, we can emulate the devices. That is your storages we can emulate. So when we use a VDI in your Oracle VirtualBox, so that is the emulation of your physical storage. When you use a processor or RAM within your virtual machine, that is the emulation of RAM and processor. That RAM are not directly available to the virtual machine, but that is a emulation kind of, that is software based instances are provided for that particular virtual machine. And all these are the emulations of devices, that is your storage emulation, RAM emulation, processor emulation, and it will provide the integrated environment. We call it as a virtual machine. So that is the simulation. So that is the simulation of your computer. जैसे हमारा